The recording on. So good morning, everybody. And technology is good when it works, and for now it seems to be working. I don't believe in jinxing, so I'll just go ahead and say that because God's in control, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So this morning, and again, I'm going to just kind of jump around a little bit in order to suit my purposes of um, keeping Revelation kind of things in Revelation time and history things in history time and things like that. So it is going to be a little bit of jump, a little bit today, just not too much. But we're going to be talking about the rest of Daniel's second vision. Last week we had only gotten through 12 verses, 12 or 13 verses, and so we're just going to pick up there and hopefully finish out the chapter. I probably um, we'll do a little bit more skipping next week. We are going to turn the corner this week and talk about some of the future things. But again, it's so that I can help set up what Revelation is so that it's more easily understandable and in the proper context, which is the Jewish context. You have to have the Jewish context in order to understand what's really going on. So that's the whole purpose of doing what we're doing. So this week we're going to be picking up and we're going to talk about this prophecy that Daniel had. If you remember last week, it said that he had a vision, but then later on in the chapter, it says that it was a dream. So this was kind of a lucid dream. And the lucid dream was such that he had some sort of panic attack after having this dream. It said that he couldn't breathe even, and he didn't even have strength after this happened. So this is a pretty crazy dream that he had. So in this vision, he sees a ram with two horns killed by a goat with a single horn. The great horn was broken. Four horns grew out of them. Out of one of the four arose another horn, and this horn destroyed the Jewish way of worship. So what did the ram symbolize? The one with the two horns.
Yeah.
Persia.
That was Persia, right? So two horns, one was the Medes and the other was the Persians. One horn was longer than the other. The Persians were stronger, and so that represents the Persian Empire, the longer horn. But then it was killed by a goat with a single horn. And what was the goat?
Greece.
That was Greece. Good. And who was the great horn of Greece?
Alexander.
Alexander the Great. So then he had an empire. When he died, it got broken into four powers. Those were the four generals that each got a part of the empire. And then out of one of the four, the Seleucid Empire, arose another horn. And this horn destroyed the Jewish way of worship. So who was this little horn? Stacy knows. It was Antiochus Epiphanes.
There you go.
Yeah, that was Antiochus. So that was the review there. So I'm messing with my screens here, trying to get everything arranged on two screens. I'm used to having three now. Got spoiled. Stacy says first world problems. All right, so now we're going to jump into verse 13. Any questions on last week's stuff? Say again?
Deep. It was deep.
Yes.
All the new names. New names. We're following though. Glad you're reading
Okay, what's new names?
that Epiphanies.
Yeah, Antiochus. We talked about him last week. He was the one that came in and sacked the he sacked the temple and killed a high priest after force feeding him a bled pig.
Oh, yeah,
Remember that?
yes.
Yes.
The Jewish people called him Antiochus Epimanes. Epimanes means madman instead of Epiphanes, which means sent by God. So yeah, he was a mess.
Trying to forget him.
So he desecrated the temple, and the Jewish people could no longer do worship there because it was not sacred anymore. It took a while for that to be straightened out, and so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Right.
Excuse me. Sorry again. Okay, so in verse 13, now we're back into Daniel's vision, and this is the time of desecration. So this is Antiochus's desecration. It says, "Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people." He said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." So the first thing I need to point out is, what do you notice about the length of time here?
7 years?
It's not the number. Don't focus on the number.
And it's separated by evenings and mornings. Just
Yeah,
like-
evenings and mornings. That's different because before we have seen days or times, but now we've got evenings and mornings. That's a little different. And so that should pique our interest. So 2,300 evenings and mornings. If you're using the King James Version, it incorrectly translated from the Latin to say 2,300 days. And that's incorrect. Since older manuscripts have been found, it's been corrected in the later, more accurate translations that we have. So again, King James is good for flowery sounding language, but it's not a very good, accurate translation. And to chase a little rabbit, the reason that it's called the authorized version, if somebody tells you, well, the King James is the authorized version, well, it was authorized by the man in charge, the king. That's the reason that it was authorized. So it's not authorized anymore because that king is gone.
So is this a reference to the way God set this up as a day was actually evening to evening?
Right. So this is a reference back into Hebrew. It was evening and morning the first day, just like in Genesis chapter 1. Very good. So the translation is not 2,300 prophetic days like the time periods were that we've been talking about in Daniel. And it's not 2,300 times or 2,300 weeks. It is 2,300 evenings and mornings. That's 6 years, 4 months, and 20 days-ish. They've got different holidays, different skip days, and things like that that happen in here, but it's about 6 years, 4 months. So Antiochus began his persecution in 171 BC. So that's when he was really coming out of the Seleucid Empire and starting his reign of tyranny across the country that included all of Israel. Judas Maccabeus, who we mentioned, I think last week, rededicated the temple December 24th of 164 BC. That's 6.5 years. So from the desecration that Antiochus caused to the time Judas Maccabeus rededicated the temple was about 6.5 years. And so that is very close on our calendar of the 6 years, 4 months, and 20 days. So that was the near fulfillment of the prophecy. Now remember, Daniel is writing this stuff down like in 530 BC. So near future for him, according to the prophecy, was 350 years later or something. So that's where we get to the 171 BC when Antiochus started, the little horn. Okay, so any questions about this part?
That's when we build 100,000 Jews, I guess. Okay. No.
Yeah, it was funny. The closed caption said that you're building a 100,000 shoes.
No. That's when he killed about 100,000 Jews, right? When he raided Israel.
Oh yeah, where he killed 100,000 Jews. That's right.
Building 100,000.
All right, so verse 15. While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man, and I heard a man's voice from the Ulai, that's the river that he was standing by in the dream, calling Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. Verse 17. As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified, and I fell prostrate. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. All right, but that's an important hint right there that something is changing in the prophecy. So now this next part, he's talking about the time of the end. Now, some think that the one who looked like a man to be a pre-incarnate Jesus, so a Christophany. But we just don't have enough information given in this verse to be able to say, yeah, this was Jesus, because Jesus also called himself Son of Man. But here, the Son of Man here is really simply a Hebrew referral to a child of humanity, which would be a proper way for an elder angel to refer to a human. You are a child of humanity. So we've already established that all of these events that we've been talking about for several weeks, so Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Antiochus, that was in the future for Daniel and his readers. But that's our past. That's our ancient history. And there's a lot of history that happened after 164 BC, which is when Antiochus did all this stuff. So we see all of that fulfilling. So how can these events be, according to Gabriel, the time of the end?
That's the dual purpose, right?
That's it. That twice fulfilled prophecy. So when we read prophecy, there is a near fulfilling. So an example would be the Messiah's coming as it was prophesied in Isaiah, or if it was prophesied in Malachi. But then there's also a far fulfilling. We know that Jesus has a second coming, and that's what we see in Revelation. So this would be another example of the twice fulfilled prophecy. And we know that it's connected because, like when Isaiah talks about the Messiah, he talks about him being the sacrifice and coming humbly and meekly. But then he also talks about him as being the lion and the conqueror, and is doing that in the same section of passage, which is kind of a juxtaposition that's hard to understand, how this suffering servant can also be the conquering king. We understand it because we have the rest of the story. But to the ancient Jews, it didn't make any sense to them at all, which is why they dismissed Jesus as being the Messiah, because all he was a suffering servant. They never saw him as a conquering king. And because of that, they missed the boat. More on that later. So it's obvious that all of this history was the first or the near fulfilling of the prophecy for Daniel. So I need to ask the question, what is the far fulfilling? Who is this little horn that Daniel's prophesying about that's going to be in our future?
Antichrist.
Exactly, the Antichrist. Very good. So in Matthew 24, Jesus gives some more hints about the timeline of the future. So in Matthew 24, verse 1, it says, Jesus left the temple and he was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? You see, now they're truly Christians and they truly understand that Jesus has two comings as the Messiah. They're properly interpreting the twice fulfilled prophecy. They know talking to him right there is the first coming and that he's going to be coming again at the end of the age. Verse 4, Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquakes in various places, and all these are the beginning of the birth pains. Verse 9, then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you'll be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second to kind of fix a moment of confusion. A lot of people take verse 13 here, where it says, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. They use that one verse out of context to say that we have to survive the tribulation in order to get to heaven. But again, that's what happens when you take verses out of context. You have to keep it in context, following the timeline, so that you can see exactly what's going on. Because the rapture, which is where Jesus comes to take the believers away, happens before the tribulation. So Jesus is referring to people that missed the rapture, so they weren't saved. If you miss the rapture and then you get saved the next day, you're going to have to live all 7 years of the tribulation before you can get to heaven. You're going to have to show yourself faithful continually throughout those 7 years. And most likely you're going to be put to death because of it. Gene?
But there's a phrase that says you will be, some will wish for death, but it's going to escape them.
Right.
So is
yeah. So they're being faithful, but the situation is so grave, they wish they could die just to be removed from it. But they need to stand firm those entire 7 years. Now, of course, If they're martyred because of the cause of Christ, then they're immediately gathered under the throne of God. So that doesn't keep you from being saved.
For children at time.
Yeah,
And then they're one of the ones that want to be avenged, or when can we avenge?
exactly. Exactly. And we'll see that in Revelation. All right, verse 15. So when you see standing in that holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Now, this is Jesus talking, okay? Then let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Okay, I got to stop here. Someone in church, and I can't remember who it was, it may have been Kenny, it was last year, said, have you been hearing in the news the Messiah that's in Israel? I'm like, what? And he said, yeah, there's this guy that's preaching all throughout Israel, and he's claiming to be the Messiah. And I'm like, no, I'm not even going to bother with it because of what Jesus said here. If anyone tells you he's out here in the wilderness, don't go out, because there are specific signs, it's prophecy that we've been given that tells us how Jesus is going to appear again. And he's not just going to be a political or social figure that all of a sudden shows up on Facebook. That sounds like something the Antichrist would use. But we know, we've got another clue right here from Jesus himself. For as lightning that comes from the east and is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. To see a lightning strike, do you need Facebook? No, you see it in the sky. And that fits in already with what we were told when Jesus ascended after his resurrection and he preached for all those extra days. And in front of 500 people, he ascends into heaven. And a voice comes out of heaven saying that in the like way, you'll see him come again. So he's going to be coming out of the sky, just like lightning comes out of the sky. Okay, any questions?
No, but I will say I saw on Facebook,
Yeah.
and obviously, and isn't there also supposed to be this trumpet that's heard across the whole earth?
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm not believing it, but it was a beautiful image of what looked like could be Jesus. I know it was viral on Facebook, but it was cloud formation of Jesus. And it was a fluke at that moment, but it was somewhat inspirational that he's still watching, he's there.
Yeah, I'm pretty cynical about anything I see on Facebook now, especially with all of this Photoshop and AI. You can have a computer generate a cloud-like Jesus in the sky, and computers will do pretty good at it. So yeah, until I see it with my own eyes, I guess. All right, verse 36. This is still Jesus talking. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, as he's speaking about himself, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day that Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That's how it will be for the coming of the Son of Man. There it is again. Jesus is talking about himself. But if you look carefully, back in Daniel, Son of Man, man was a little m. And here, Son of Man, man is a capital M. So this is Jesus using this title for himself, kind of tongue in cheek and ironically. He is a physical son of humanity through Mary, but he is still God. And then verse 40, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken and the other left. So verse 42, he says, therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. So Matthew 24:36, when he says the hour or the day, says, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. So when I get to the section of Revelation that we talk about the second coming, I'm actually going to pause for one Sunday and I'm going to talk about the ritual of the Jewish wedding. Because the Jewish wedding, all of the events that lead up to it and the events immediately after it is something that was set up by God. And what's really cool is that the second coming of the Messiah follows that ritual. And that's why we are called the bride of Christ as being Christians, because we are going to be picked up by the bridegroom, Jesus, when the time is right. But just a little sneak peek, in the Jewish wedding ceremony, the groom doesn't even know when his own wedding day is. The wedding day is set up by the Father. And it's only when things are prepared properly that the wedding can occur. So that's your little sneak peek. That's cool stuff. And so you'll have a lot of aha moments when we talk about that when we get there. Okay?
Yes.
Yay.
All right. I got to talk about the Antichrist. So we know that Antiochus Epiphanes did some horrible things in Israel, desecrating the children, the temple. But now all of that is going to happen again at the end times, including the desecration of the temple. So I got to give some definitions here. So Antichrist is a kind of a person prophesied by the Bible to oppose Jesus Christ and falsely substitute themselves as Savior in Christ's place before the second coming. Okay, so that's an important definition. 1 John 2:18 says, dear children, this is the last hour, and you have heard that the Antichrist is coming. But John says here, even now, many antichrists have come. This is how we know it's the last hour. So even in the days immediately following Jesus's resurrection, they considered that already being the end times. They were in the end times then. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still in the end times. That's important to wrap your mind around, because next week when we talk about the 77s, then you're going to see these last times come up again. Look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. In verse 7, so this is Paul writing to the church at Thessalonica. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so until he's taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie. And all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing, they perish because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. Now think of our society today. Our society today hates truth. They hate the absolute truth, and everyone wants to have their own relative truth. And as long as it's true to me, then it's true. I don't care if you believe it's your truth or not truth or whatever. And you have to be tolerant of my truth because I'm sensitive. I don't know. I don't get it. But truth is truth. And we're talking about a time in society where people cannot handle the truth. They just don't want to hear it. Stacy told me something the other day that freaked me out. And on Facebook, they will block you if you use the word dead to refer to a person. That person's dead. So anything about a dead or death or anything like that, dying, they consider that violence. And so they'll put you in Facebook jail. And so now people, to get around that, they say they're the unliving. They're unalive. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's George Orwell's 1984. That's exactly the kind of language that people were using in that book. If you were not made to read that book when you were a senior in high school, you need to read it. It is scary because we are living in the time of George Orwell's 1984, and that was written probably in 1948. So yeah, it's prophetic also, but prophetic in terms of society, not in terms of spirituality. So every generation since 100 AD has had an antichrist prepared. Now remember, Jesus himself said in Matthew 24, no one knows when the end times are coming. Not even he knows, nor the angels. Only God knows. Well, Satan is an angel. So that means Satan doesn't know when the end times are either. Since Satan doesn't know, he has to have all of his chess pieces put in place at all times so that when God makes his move for the end times, Satan has everything ready to confront God. Unsuccessfully, but the confrontation does occur. In 2 Corinthians 11:13, it says, for such people, these antichrists, are false apostles. They're deceitful workers. They're masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. Okay? So just to kind of put this in context for you, if you know that Satan has had to have antichrist prepared all along the way, who is one in history that you might be able to point your finger and say that was an antichrist, little a?
No,
Hitler. So let's talk about Hitler for a second. So those of y'all who know about Hitler, His mother was what religion?
Jewish.
She was Jewish, and he hated Jews. He was a Lutheran, okay? And so he hated Jews, and he persecuted the Jews because he accused them of being the Christ killers. So he was wrapping himself in a shroud of Christianity and doing his dirty work. In the late 1930s, there are actually written sermons of famous pastors in the United States that talk about the great work of Hitler and how wonderful he is, because at that time, it was a misunderstanding. They totally missed something that we've been taught since we were young, that no one took Jesus's life. No one killed Jesus. Scripture plainly says that he laid down his own life. If he wanted to get off the cross, he could have. If he wanted to kill all the Romans there, he could have. If he wanted to straighten out the Jews there, he could have. But he didn't. He laid down his own life. But Hitler persecuted the Jews because he said that they were the Christ killers. And that's how he justified doing all of the atrocious acts that he did under his reign. That is an antichrist. And there's others that you can probably think of in history. People are always looking for the antichrist, even going to the point of saying, if you take the numbers, I'm see if I can remember how it goes. If you take the numbers that symbolize the letters in a ruler's name, if they add up to 666, then that's the Antichrist. And so when Obama was running for president, that was one of the names that numerically came up to 666. And so the radical Christians were saying he has to be the Antichrist. It doesn't work that way. So here's something that'll ease your mind. If you can figure it out, it's not right. Because God says no one knows. No one knows. All right, so what does this mean? So we can conclude Satan has no idea when the return of Christ will be. Therefore, he must have an antichrist ready to go for the moment the restraint is lifted. Who's the restrainer? God. Okay. So he has been preparing for this since the time of the apostles and has continued to do this in every generation since. Therefore, every generation has had at least one person who would have become the capital A Antichrist had the rapture occurred in their time. That person would come as an angel of light, looking fantastic. Everybody's going to love him. It's going to be speaking peace, doing works of righteousness, maybe even a leader in the church in the midst of Christians. In order for the Antichrist, capital A, to be effective, he must enter into a world of chaos and war. Therefore, in every generation, Satan has worked to provoke such an environment of chaos and an environment of war. So that explains why we are always in the mess we're in. So this might help explain why every generation sees someone who fits the bill of the Antichrist, why chaos has ruled the world for the past 2,000 years, why so many people are deceived by false religions and cults, and why people like Napoleon and Hitler seem to have so many worldwide followers. They know how to come in disguise and gather as many people to them as possible. So the end times. Daniel chapter 8, verse 19, Gabriel says, I am going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath. because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece. The large horn between its eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people, and he will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So this is Gabriel telling Daniel what's going on. Okay, so any questions about that? We know who all the people are, right? We know the players.
Well, is this after the rapture or before the rapture?
Both. So the before the rapture part is still talking about what's future for Daniel that's in our past. So Medo-Persia, Greece, Alexander the Great, the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus Epiphanes, the desecration of the temple, the trampling of the holy people. So that's the stuff that happened in our past. But now Gabriel is trying to make Daniel understand that this is going to happen in the far future too. And so that's what's pointing to after the rapture. Okay, so that's why I said both. So he said later in the time of wrath. The prophecy in this passage reads equally true of both Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist. A fierce-looking king. Antiochus was known for his cruel brutality. That's also going to be true for the Antichrist. He's a master of intrigue. Antiochus was known for his flattery and his smooth tongue. The Antichrist will strike a peace covenant with Israel. Power, but not his own. Antiochus was empowered by Satan and allowed by God. The same is going to be true of the Antichrist. These things must happen in accordance with Scripture. So he's going to succeed at what he does. Antiochus looked like a total success. He had power, he had wealth. The Antichrist will look the same until God takes him out. Destroy the mighty. Antiochus not only destroyed his enemies, but also highly persecuted the people of God. The Antichrist is also going to destroy and persecute, but he's going to be persecuting anybody that doesn't worship him, including, of course, all the Christians. He causes deceit to prosper. So both the rule of Antiochus in the past and the Antichrist in our future are marked by deceit. And it says, he will consider himself superior. The coins that Antiochus had minted, they were inscribed Theos Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. And it had his image on it. So he was saying that he was God in the flesh. And according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, the Antichrist will also exalt himself as God. He rises up against the prince of princes. So though Antiochus hated the people of God and fought against them, it was really because he hated God. He didn't want anyone that he was subject to. And since we're all subject to God, he was trying to get people to not worship God and worship himself instead. And the same is going to be true of the Antichrist as the puppet of Satan. And then in the prophecy, it said that he's destroyed not by human hands. So Antiochus died of disease. In the apocryphal book of Second Maccabees, chapter 9, it tells us, but the all-seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him with an incurable and invisible blow. As soon as he stopped speaking, he was seized with a pain in his bowels for which there was no relief, and with sharp internal tortures, and that very justly, for he had tortured the bowels of others with many and strange inflictions. And so the ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish and pain, his flesh rotted away, and because of the stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay. That's pretty gruesome. Similarly, the Antichrist will not be defeated by human hands, but the hand of Jesus will strike him down, according to Revelation 19:20. One little hint, though, it says that the Antichrist is going to be wounded in the head with a fatal blow, and yet he recovers fully. And so guess what? People saying Trump being shot in the head shows that he's the Antichrist. But it wasn't a fatal blow. So don't take scripture out of context. So Daniel 8:26. This is still Gabriel talking to Daniel. It says, the vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given you is true. But seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. So because it had to do with prophecy, there still had to be a near fulfilling. And that's why we see from the time of Antiochus to the time of Judas Maccabeus restoring the temple, that fits the bill for the 6 years, 4 months, 20 days. But Gabriel is saying there's something in the far future, distant future. So Daniel has to seal this up. I mean, don't share this with anyone in public, because in his day, the vision referred to a period far distant in its ultimate fulfillment. For us, the time is near. Revelation 1:3 tells us. And the book is revealed, so that's unsealed. That's why it's called Revelation in 22:10. So Revelation is the unsealing of all of these future time prophecies that were given to Daniel and to Ezekiel and to Isaiah that were all about the far future. It was revealed to us in the book of Revelation. Okay, so next week we're going to jump into that and talk about the 77s. So before we leave today, is there any questions?
What's the theme on the ship today?
I think today is Motown. Yeah, today is Motown in the 60s.
Okay, Diana, go for it.
All right, we all good?
Thank you
Right,
for,
thank you.
Thank
Thanks for getting up at the crack of
yes.
midnight.
Yeah, so I will be next Sunday. I think it'll be 12:46 a.m. for me. So I'll just have to stay up late to give y'all the lesson.
We'll drink with you.
Okay.
Everybody's talking over each other. I can't understand you now.
Basically, they want to drink with you.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think they're talking about coffee.
All right, y'all. That's all I have. Y'all have a great day. Enjoy your week. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.